I think it's really important that we can try and change and tackle the narrative around homelessness.
In this video, we're diving deep into one of the most shocking power shifts in royal history. Prince William just made a move that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, leaving Queen Consort Camilla completely sidelined. But before we get into the details, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our royal updates. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And stick around until the end, because I have a burning question for you about who you think should lead the monarchy's future. Now, let's get into this incredible story. It all started with whispers that nobody thought would turn into something this massive. William said no. At first, people brushed it off as just random gossip, the type that floats around fancy palace rooms and disappears quietly. But this time, those words had real power behind them, enough to shake up hundreds of years of royal tradition. Canceling a major state visit wasn't just brave, it was something that had never happened before. For days, everyone at Buckingham Palace couldn't believe what was happening. Camilla had spent months getting ready for this important diplomatic trip. She had picked out beautiful gowns, planned fancy receptions, and prepared speeches. Everything was carefully organized to make her position stronger as the monarchy's reliable leader. But with just one decision, Prince William knocked it all down. The official announcement was short and businesslike, saying there were scheduling problems. But everyone who worked at the palace knew that was completely false. Something much bigger had changed. So what do you think pushed William to make such a bold move? Behind closed doors, you could feel the tension in the air like a terrible storm about to hit. Camilla's helpers were absolutely furious. They were walking back and forth through her private offices, demanding answers from the royal press team. Her most trusted workers mumbled that William had crossed a line, that this was an embarrassment no queen consort should ever have to face. But even these loyal staff members could see what was really happening. This wasn't about scheduling conflicts at all. It was William making a clear statement, showing everyone who was really in charge. William's advisors stayed calm and composed, insisting this was a smart decision to change royal priorities in a better direction. But their calmness only made people more suspicious. To override Camilla's plans meant crossing boundaries that even Charles rarely touched. For the first time since becoming Prince of Wales, William had drawn a clear line in the sand, one that split the entire monarchy into two separate groups. How far would this division go? On one side stood the old guard, people loyal to the Queen Consort who wanted to defend tradition and the way things had always been done. On the other side, a younger group of reformers quietly rallied behind William and Catherine, a couple determined to reshape how the crown looked to the world. To them, canceling the trip wasn't an act of rebellion. It was about making things new and better. But to Camilla, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. When the order reached her, people say she went completely silent. The kind of silence that makes even experienced palace workers nervous. What was going through her mind during that moment? Hours later, her private secretary was spotted leaving Kensington Palace looking pale and tight-lipped. The story was already starting to leak out. Reporters camping outside the palace gates sensed something huge was happening. Within hours, headlines exploded everywhere. Power struggle in the palace. William defies the Queen Consort. Who's really running the monarchy? The royal press offices scrambled desperately, releasing carefully worded denials that actually contradicted each other. From Clarence House came a message emphasizing unity, while from Kensington, another statement subtly reaffirmed William's commitment to modern leadership. Could anyone stop this growing conflict? Behind the diplomatic language, a quieter revolution was happening right under everyone's noses. Royal correspondents showed a subtle shift in tone during briefings. Catherine's initiatives began taking priority over Camilla's. Invitations once addressed to the Queen Consort were quietly redirected to the Princess of Wales. It wasn't just about a cancelled trip anymore. It was about influence, public perception, and who truly spoke for the monarchy's future. Camilla, once considered untouchable, suddenly found herself pushed to the side. Was this just the beginning of her downfall? For years, Camilla had mastered the art of quiet control, shaping narratives, balancing Charles's temper, and outmaneuvering critics. But now, her control was slipping away, and no amount of palace spin could hide it. What made things even worse was Catherine's silence. While others panicked, Catherine stayed composed. Her schedule was filled with charitable visits and calm public appearances. Her quiet grace stood in sharp contrast to Camilla's visible frustration. It was as if Catherine knew that the best power move was to say absolutely nothing at all. What would Camilla do to fight back? Inside the palace, one phrase began circulating among staff. "The crown is shifting." They said it half joking, half in amazement. But even they couldn't deny the feeling that something irreversible had begun. William's defiance wasn't a mistake or a moment of anger. It was a calculated act, a message to the entire institution that the old way of doing things was over. But this wasn't about one cancelled trip. It was the beginning of a silent takeover within the palace walls. How would the other royals respond? In the stillness of Clarence House, silence was no longer just a formality. It had become a weapon. Phones were taken away, aides were dismissed, and conversations were reduced to whispers that carried the weight of betrayal. Meetings once held in grand rooms now took place behind locked doors with trusted staff standing guard outside. Something inside the royal establishment had cracked. Every step, every word, every decision was being watched, recorded, and interpreted. The balance of power had shifted, but no one dared to name it aloud. Because within those walls, one question haunted everyone who truly controlled the monarchy now. For Camilla, it was more than just a challenge. It was about survival. Her reign as the quiet stabilizer of the crown was suddenly under siege. Her authority was being questioned by the very generation she once helped shield. But William's defiance had awakened a new energy, one rooted not in rebellion, but in strong conviction. He wasn't just a son or an heir anymore. He was a man who had decided that the crown could no longer belong to the past. Would the old guard ever accept this new reality? The word William used in private meetings was modernization. He spoke of transparency, accountability, and purpose, ideals that made his father's court look like something from another age. And at his side, Catherine became more than his partner. She became the mirror of what the monarchy could be if compassion replaced rigid protocol. Their late-night discussions at Kensington were no longer about appearances. They were about principles. What kind of monarchy were they trying to build? Advisors, once cautious and careful, began choosing sides. Some remained loyal to Camilla and her traditionalists, believing the monarchy's strength lay in keeping secrets. Others moved toward William and Catherine, drawn to their promise of renewal. The quiet reshuffling began. Schedulers were reassigned. Press secretaries were moved. Invitations were redirected. The palace map was being redrawn, not in stone or ink, but in loyalty and allegiance. Could Camilla feel the ground slipping beneath her? Camilla could absolutely feel it happening. Her allies in the press, long her shield against public criticism, began planting stories meant to damage Catherine's image. Subtle at first, then increasingly vicious. Whispers of fatigue, of emotional strain, of a princess out of her depth. Headlines questioned Catherine's ability to handle royal pressures, portraying her as fragile beneath the facade of composure. But those who knew Catherine understood that silence didn't mean weakness. It meant preparation. How long could Catherine stay silent under these attacks? She saw the attacks not as insults, but as signs of fear. And though the barrage wounded her deeply, she carried herself with poise that only made her critics more frustrated. Behind the scenes, a quiet Cold War was raging. Camilla's confidants accused William's circle of undermining royal unity, while William's aides countered that the Queen Consort's camp was leaking sensitive information to the media. Lines were drawn, trust evaporated, and the very institution built on keeping secrets began to destroy itself from within. Where would this end? Charles, always trying to be the mediator, found himself paralyzed, unable to calm the storm without choosing a side. But beneath all the diplomacy and denial, it was clear this was no simple misunderstanding. It was a battle for the soul of the monarchy, and in the center of it all stood Catherine, torn between loyalty and legacy. Her instinct was to heal, to calm the waves that threatened to drown the family she had married into. But each attempt at peace only made her a larger target. What choice did Catherine have? Every gesture, every word, every silence became ammunition for one side or the other. She began to realize that diplomacy might no longer be enough. To protect the future, she would have to take a stand, even if it meant confronting the ghosts that ruled the palace from the shadows. Tension built quietly and suffocatingly as those within the royal circle began to anticipate a breaking point. The walls of Clarence House, once symbols of prestige, now felt like the walls of a fortress under attack. And though no one could see it yet, the battle lines had already been drawn in ink that could never be erased. What would finally break the tension? But the true spark of rebellion came not from inside the palace. It came from a leaked email. It began with a single document, a simple internal memo meant for only a handful of royal eyes. Yet within hours, it became the spark that set the entire monarchy ablaze. The leak appeared online without warning, posted anonymously on a small but well-connected political blog. At first, few people paid attention, but then came the image, a scanned itinerary stamped with the official royal seal. What did this document reveal? It detailed an upcoming state visit to Paris, personally led by Her Majesty the Queen Consort, representing the crown. And just below that title, written in sharp, unmistakable red ink, were two words that tore through the palace like thunder. Authorization revoked. The effect was instant and devastating. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters camped outside every royal residence. Within minutes, the leak had spread from small political circles to front-page headlines everywhere. Palace in crisis. Power struggle at the top. William overrules Camilla. Who was behind this leak? The world had questions, and no one inside the palace seemed willing to answer them. But among those who recognized the handwriting, a quiet panic took hold. Some claimed the red writing matched William's signature style, the same sharp, deliberate lettering used in official documents from Kensington Palace. Others insisted it was a forgery, someone trying to create chaos. The truth didn't matter anymore. The damage was already done. How would Camilla respond to this humiliation? Camilla's team went into overdrive, furious and humiliated. Her aides demanded an internal investigation, calling the leak an act of deliberate sabotage. Behind the polished smiles, accusations flew like daggers. Clarence House officials whispered that Kensington had orchestrated the exposure to embarrass the Queen Consort. Kensington denied it strongly, calling the claims deeply disappointing. But the press didn't need proof to feast on the story. All they needed was speculation, and speculation became wildfire. What would the media make of this scandal? Royal correspondents began drawing their own conclusions, crafting narratives of betrayal and control. William, they said, was tired of Camilla's growing influence, her constant push to redefine her role, to step into the international spotlight. Catherine, on the other hand, was portrayed as the quiet strategist, the elegant architect behind a new royal order. Her silence became its own powerful message, one that spoke louder than any denial. She neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, offering only the composed grace of someone who knew the storm would eventually destroy itself. Was this silence a sign of strength or strategy? To many, that silence was not submission. It was absolute control. Behind palace doors, however, the mood was far from calm. Charles was absolutely livid, demanding answers from both households. Meetings stretched long into the night, filled with tense voices and veiled threats. Camilla confronted senior aides, her composure cracking as she demanded to know how her private plans had been exposed. Her anger wasn't just about the trip, it was about public humiliation. Could their relationship survive this crisis? For years, she had fought for acceptance, slowly transforming public opinion from hatred to tolerance. Now, in one brutal moment, that progress had been completely undone. William, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Advisors warned him that the narrative was spiraling out of control. The press painted him as ruthless, defiant, and power-hungry, the prince who dared to silence the queen. Supporters called him bold. Critics called him reckless. But deep down, he understood that this was bigger than public relations. What was William's ultimate goal? It was about who shaped the monarchy's future, the old guard or the next generation. His decision to stay silent only fueled the fire, allowing gossip to evolve into legend. Every tabloid wanted a villain. Every journalist wanted a quote. Yet the royal family gave them nothing but silence. And in that silence, the world began to choose sides. Some saw Camilla as the wounded queen betrayed by her stepson. Others saw William and Catherine as the rightful heirs of a more moral modern crown. Could the monarchy survive this division? The institution that prided itself on unity was fracturing before the public's eyes. The official inquiry never found the source of the leak. But within royal circles, the damage was permanent. Trust once broken never truly returned. From that day forward, every handshake felt cautious, every smile rehearsed. What began as an administrative cancellation had transformed into a symbol, a sign that the crown's foundations were no longer unshakable. And yet, the true story behind that red ink was only beginning to unfold. What deeper history was driving this conflict? Because the fallout from that leak didn't end with headlines. It reignited a rivalry decades in the making. For William, every decision he made carried the quiet weight of his mother's name. Diana was gone, but her shadow had never left him. It lived in the public's gaze, in every comparison, in every whisper that measured his compassion against his father's restraint. Even now, years later, Her memory still haunted the palace halls, not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a symbol of what the monarchy had lost. How much did Diana's memory influence William's actions? The people had adored Diana because she defied the rules that caged her. She had shown humanity in a world built on distance. And to many, William's decision to cancel Camilla's trip wasn't about politics or protocol. It was about reclaiming something sacred. The woman who replaced his mother had taken the spotlight for too long. This time, William wasn't just protecting the crown. He was protecting her memory. Behind closed doors, the emotional toll of that legacy often left him torn between duty and conscience. Did Catherine understand this burden? Those who saw him up close spoke of moments when the calm, measured prince would suddenly fall into silence, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. Catherine understood those silences better than anyone. She knew when to speak, when to listen, and when to simply stay by his side. She had seen the burden that came with being Diana's son, the expectations, the comparisons, the grief that never fully healed, and she carried that weight with him, quietly without asking for recognition. In her presence, William found not just love, but balance, the kind his mother had longed for and never received. Would the world see Catherine the same way they saw Diana? But the outside world had no mercy. The press began to draw their own connections, weaving a narrative that neither William nor Catherine could control. Headlines declared Catherine the new Diana, the reincarnation of the people's princess, graceful, empathetic, adored. Her presence at public events drew the same kind of warmth and emotion Diana once inspired. Crowds cheered her name. Photographs of her with children and hospital patients flooded the media, and comparisons became impossible to escape. It was flattering, but it was also dangerous. How did Camilla react to these comparisons? For Camilla, it wasn't admiration. It was erasure. Each glowing headline for Catherine dimmed her own relevance. Every kind word for the Princess of Wales was a reminder of how fragile her position truly was. Behind the appearance of civility, Camilla's discomfort began to show. Her allies whispered of unfair treatment, of orchestrated public relations tactics designed to elevate Catherine at her expense. In truth, Catherine had done nothing of the sort. Her rise wasn't engineered. It was natural and inevitable. What made Catherine so beloved by the public? The people saw in her what they had once seen in Diana: warmth, humility, and authenticity. But for Camilla, who had fought for decades to gain acceptance, it felt like betrayal all over again. Old insecurities resurfaced, and with them came quiet resentment. It wasn't jealousy in the ordinary sense. It was fear. Fear that history was repeating itself, and that once again, the world would side with Diana's legacy over hers. Could Camilla ever overcome this comparison? In those tense weeks, William and Catherine found themselves navigating not just politics, but deep emotion, a battle between past wounds and present responsibilities. Late at night, when the palace was still, and the headlines had stopped screaming, the two would sit together in quiet reflection. William would speak of his mother not as the public icon she became, but as the woman he remembered, kind, flawed, radiant, and trapped. Catherine would listen, her hand steady in his, reminding him that the cycle didn't have to repeat. What did Catherine tell William to comfort him? "You're not your father," she once told him softly, "and I'm not her." It wasn't defiance. It was reassurance, the kind of reassurance that allowed him to breathe again. In that fragile space between memory and duty, a transformation began. Catherine wasn't just a partner anymore. She was becoming the heart of the institution itself. Her calm strength, her empathy, her restraint, these were no longer just personal virtues. They were the qualities the monarchy desperately needed to survive. Had Diana's vision finally been realized? And though William didn't say it aloud, he knew the truth. Diana's spirit hadn't vanished. It had simply found a new voice. As the ghosts of the past stirred, the palace turned its gaze towards the future and Catherine's unexpected rise. When the cameras flashed again, the world noticed a shift, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Catherine wasn't standing in William's shadow anymore. She was leading. What had changed in Catherine? Her calm confidence and measured words began to reshape the monarchy's public image, giving it a sense of grace and purpose that had been missing for so long. Invitations once addressed to Her Majesty the Queen Consort were quietly replaced with a new name: Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. The gesture seemed administrative, but to those who understood the hidden currents of royal politics, it was absolutely massive. It marked a transfer of influence, one that neither King Charles nor Camilla could publicly challenge. Was Catherine now the real face of the monarchy? Catherine had become the face the monarchy needed, a bridge between old world tradition and modern compassion. Her emergence came not through grand speeches or political maneuvering, but through quiet, deliberate action. Every engagement she attended carried real meaning. Every cause she supported reflected empathy, not just formality. When she met ordinary families, comforted grieving children, or stood beside health workers, the cameras didn't just capture a royal figure. They captured a woman who embodied warmth and stability in a world tired of cold aristocracy. How did the public respond to this transformation? The public, once skeptical of anyone replacing Diana in their hearts, began to draw the inevitable comparisons. The People's Princess Reborn. One headline read, echoing across continents. But Catherine wasn't a reflection of the past. She was its evolution. Where Diana rebelled, Catherine redefined. Behind this transformation stood William, who had grown more assertive in shaping the monarchy's direction. He began repositioning the royal family as a symbol of moral renewal, grounded not in bloodlines, but in character. Were William and Catherine the future of the monarchy? Together, William and Catherine projected unity. Not the staged unity of press releases, but the kind born from mutual trust. Their teamwork was effortless, and that terrified their rivals. For years, the institution had relied on hierarchy and age to maintain control. But William and Catherine were rewriting that order without ever saying so aloud. Even palace workers began whispering that the true leadership of the monarchy was no longer in Charles's hands. It had shifted quietly and inevitably into the next generation's grasp. What did this mean for Camilla? Meanwhile, Camilla's world was shrinking. Her public appearances grew fewer, her smiles tighter, her energy dimmer. Once surrounded by loyal advisors and sympathetic reporters, she now faced dwindling influence and increasing scrutiny. Behind palace walls, her frustration was obvious to everyone. Each headline praising Catherine felt like a cut. Each photograph of the new royal couple was a reminder that she was being written out of the narrative. Could Camilla regain her position? Her attempts to regain footing through charity events and interviews only highlighted the contrast. Where Catherine's presence felt effortless, Camilla's seemed forced. The harder she tried to prove her relevance, the more the world turned away. Through it all, Catherine remained untouched by drama. Her strength was her silence, a silence that spoke volumes. While others fought for recognition, she simply was. In moments where anger could have erupted, she chose dignity. In moments of triumph, she chose humility. What was the source of Catherine's power? And in that restraint lay her true power. The monarchy, once battered by scandals and divisions, began to heal under her soft guidance. Even those who once doubted her now admired the balance she brought, a balance between tradition and empathy, grace and resilience. But beneath the calm surface, deeper tension simmered. For every step Catherine took forward, Camilla felt herself pushed further into the background. The contrast between them, one serene, one seething, became the defining dynamic of the royal household. What was Camilla planning? Those closest to the throne could sense that something was coming, because as Catherine's star rose higher than ever before, Camilla's silence began to twist into determination. And just when it seemed that the monarchy had finally found peace, the old queen consort made a decision that would shatter the illusion of harmony. Because the true storm broke when Camilla decided she wouldn't go down quietly. Would Camilla fight back? Camilla had endured every humiliation the crown could throw at her. The whispered scandals, the public's coldness, the years of being labeled the other woman. She had clawed her way from national disgrace to reluctant acceptance. And she wasn't about to be erased now. In her mind, Catherine's rise wasn't destiny. It was theft. So as the public adored the new Princess of Wales, Camilla quietly began to rebuild her power. What was her strategy? She called in old favors, whispered to editors she'd once charmed, and reminded loyal journalists that they owed their access to her. What began as soft gossip soon turned into a storm, one designed to break the image of perfection surrounding William and Catherine. It started with subtle headlines, questions about Catherine's health, her workload, her fragile demeanor. Then came the insinuations of marital strain, late-night arguments, and emotional exhaustion. Each article carried the same message. Was the golden couple cracking under pressure? Who was behind these attacks? The attacks were surgical, precise, and relentless. It was a masterclass in quiet revenge, and though no one could prove the source, those closest to the palace knew exactly where the leaks originated. For years, Camilla had built relationships with powerful editors, trading private insights for favorable coverage. Now, those old connections became her battlefield. Catherine, ever composed in public, began to feel the strain in private. How did these attacks affect Catherine? The tabloid cruelty, the twisting of her silence into weakness, cut deeper than she admitted. Friends noticed the subtle changes. Fewer smiles, shorter answers, nights where sleep refused to come. She had faced criticism before, but this was different. It was coordinated, personal, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of what Diana had endured. The suffocating mix of scrutiny, speculation, and half-truths designed to break a royal woman from within. Would Catherine break under this pressure? Yet unlike Diana, Catherine refused to let the pain consume her. She chose patience and observation because she knew something the others didn't. That this fight wasn't about headlines. It was about who the public would believe. But William couldn't stay silent. His anger boiled beneath his calm exterior, ready to erupt. Those who were present in the palace during those weeks described tense meetings, raised voices, and slammed doors. How did William confront this situation? William had always respected his stepmother, tolerated her even for the sake of peace. But now he saw her differently, as a threat to everything he and Catherine had built. Behind closed doors, he confronted his father. The conversation was short, sharp, and devastating. William accused Camilla of orchestrating a smear campaign. Charles defended her, insisting she was the victim of unfounded paranoia. The words that followed fractured what little unity remained. How damaged was the relationship between father and son? Father and son left that room fundamentally changed. No longer allies, but rivals bound by blood and duty. And then came the leak that turned the quiet war into open chaos. A phone call, private, emotional, and never meant for public ears, surfaced online. In it, William could be heard expressing anger and despair over betrayal within the family. The tabloids devoured it, dissecting every word, every breath, every pause. Who had leaked this private conversation? No one knew for sure. Some blamed Camilla's supporters. Others suggested palace staff loyal to her had done the deed. Either way, the damage was catastrophic. Overnight, the monarchy's carefully rebuilt image crumbled. The institution faced its most brutal public relations crisis in a decade. Commentators called it a civil war under crowns. The royal brand, once shielded by unity, now bled through cracks visible to the entire world. Could the monarchy survive this? Charles, torn between his wife and his heir, found himself paralyzed. A monarch unable to command his own family. Camilla's retaliation had achieved its goal. She was back at the center of the storm. But in her victory, she had miscalculated badly. Because while William's rage burned hot, Catherine's resolve burned cold. And then, just when the monarchy seemed ready to implode, Catherine made a move no one saw coming. What did Catherine do? While the world devoured scandal, Catherine did something few expected. She stayed silent. No rebuttals, no interviews, no carefully worded statements released through palace aides. Just silence. A silence so deliberate, it became its own kind of powerful statement. While others tried to explain, defend, or control the narrative, she stepped back and let the storm exhaust itself. And when the noise finally began to fade, what remained was her unwavering composure, calm, dignified, and untouchable. Was silence Catherine's greatest weapon? In an age where every word is dissected, her refusal to engage became her greatest power. Instead of reacting, she redirected. While tabloids spun theories and commentators speculated wildly, Catherine returned to what she did best: service. She visited children's hospitals, consoled grieving parents, and met with mental health advocates. Each appearance felt effortless, but it carried real weight. Her gestures weren't grand, but they were deeply human. How did the public respond to Catherine's approach? People saw through the chaos and found something unshakable in her quiet strength. They began to realize that while others chased control through influence and manipulation, Catherine commanded respect through restraint. The press could twist her silence into weakness, but the public knew better. They saw a woman who refused to let bitterness define her. Slowly, the tide began to turn dramatically. Opinion columns shifted from critique to admiration. Was Catherine winning the battle? International outlets praised her for her poise under pressure. Foreign leaders who once hesitated to comment publicly now praised her sense of duty and dignity. The headlines that once pitted her against Camilla transformed into tributes to her endurance. The embodiment of grace, one article declared. Unmoved by chaos, unwavering in purpose, said another. What had started as an attack campaign had backfired spectacularly. Had Camilla's plan completely failed? Camilla's attempts to tarnish Catherine had only amplified her glow. Every bitter whisper, every cynical story only made Catherine's silence more powerful, more royal. Camilla, meanwhile, began to feel the isolation she once imposed on others. Her allies in the press grew distant, unwilling to attach themselves to a narrative that had turned toxic. The palace staff, who had once served her loyally, began migrating toward the new center of power, Kensington. Even her husband, King Charles, seemed weary of the tension. What was Charles thinking? He admired his wife's resilience, yes, but he couldn't deny that the public had shifted its allegiance completely. Catherine now represented what the monarchy wanted to be: compassionate, unifying, and forward-looking. Camilla represented what it feared becoming: defensive, divided, and outdated. Inside palace walls, the transformation didn't go unnoticed. William watched his wife with quiet pride, fully aware of what her composure had achieved. What had Catherine accomplished? She hadn't just survived the smear campaign, she'd transcended it. He saw in her the very qualities his mother had embodied, not through rebellion, but through balance. Where Diana had been fire, Catherine was water, calm, deliberate, and enduring. And for the first time, William understood what leadership looked like when it came not from command, but from character. When would Catherine's moment come? Her defining moment came when the crown faced a delicate diplomatic crisis. With Charles unwell and Camilla absent from public life, Catherine was asked to represent the monarchy at an international summit, a first for any Princess of Wales in decades. The world watched as she stood before global leaders, confident yet humble, embodying the very stability the royal family had lost. Her speech, measured and sincere, was described as the rebirth of British grace. Was Catherine now the monarchy's true leader? It was the moment even her critics had to admit she was no longer just a royal figure. She was the monarchy's heart. And yet, behind the adoration and calm triumph, new whispers began to surface. Whispers that William's assertiveness had gone too far, that by empowering Catherine, he had quietly rewritten the monarchy's internal order, one where loyalty to tradition was slowly being replaced by loyalty to them. And as Catherine's star rose higher than ever, one question began echoing through every corridor of the palace. Had William gone too far? When King Charles returned from his retreat at Balmoral, he came back to a monarchy that no longer looked like the one he had left behind. The landscape had changed, subtly at first, then completely. What, once balanced on the weight of tradition, now tilted towards something new, something unmistakably shaped by William and Catherine. The air around him felt different, charged with quiet defiance and controlled confidence. What did Charles find upon his return? Advisors waited in hushed anxiety, briefing him on the storm that had brewed in his absence. The cancelled engagements, the public's fervent embrace of the younger royals, and the whispering corridors that no longer echoed with loyalty, but with uncertainty. They begged him to act, to reassert control, to restore the balance that Camilla's absence had broken. But Charles didn't move decisively. He listened, he nodded, and then he retreated once more, not into solitude, but into thought. Did Charles still have real power? For the first time, the king began to question if his crown still commanded power, or if it had merely become a symbol, overshadowed by his heir's rising influence. Behind the palace doors, Camilla was unraveling. Stripped of visibility and humiliated by silence, she pleaded with Charles to step forward, to remind the world who truly ruled. Her voice, usually tempered with regal restraint, now carried desperation. "You must put an end to this," she reportedly told him. Would Charles defend Camilla? But Charles, ever the thinker, hesitated. He understood that any attempt to reinstate her might only deepen the divide. The public adored Catherine. The press had crowned her long before he could correct them. To oppose that tide would make him look out of touch, weak, or worse, jealous of his own son's growing popularity. He loved his wife, but he also feared the cost of defending her. So, in his silence, he did what kings have done for centuries when power slips through their fingers. He waited, hoping time would correct what courage could not. Was Charles a weak king? But William had no intention of waiting. In private meetings with the senior courtiers, his tone was steady, his words deliberate. He spoke of modernization, efficiency, and public trust. He was polite but immovable. The king's advisors described his demeanor as eerily calm, the kind of confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from certainty. He was the future, and everyone in the room knew it. Had William already taken control? The divide between father and son deepened, not through open conflict, but through unspoken truth. William represented progress. Charles represented preservation. And the monarchy, for the first time in living memory, stood at a crossroads with no clear leader. Outside the palace, speculation grew rampant. Newspapers began floating the word abdication. Columnists questioned whether Charles had the strength to lead through an era demanding evolution, not just endurance. Would Charles abdicate? Opinion polls hinted at the unthinkable, a public increasingly ready to move on. The image of a weary king, retreating from confrontation, stood in stark contrast to the poised, energetic faces of William and Catherine, who carried on with engagements that no longer needed royal approval. They were acting as monarchs already, and no one dared correct them. In a last attempt to restore order, Charles summoned a family summit at Windsor. What happened at this meeting? The gathering was described by one insider as a cold war in crowns. There were no raised voices, no shouting, only silence sharpened by tension. Camilla sat stone-faced. William's expression was unreadable. Catherine composed yet distant. The words exchanged were few, but the meaning was crystal clear. The monarchy was no longer united by duty, but divided by design. When the meeting ended, nothing had been resolved. Had the monarchy fractured beyond repair? The crown, once a symbol of continuity, now felt fragile, suspended between past and future, between fear and inevitability. That night, as the palace lights dimmed, Charles stared out over the gardens, a man burdened by the weight of both legacy and love. He knew the balance could not hold much longer. The whispers of abdication had become a roar in the world beyond the gates, and within his own family, the succession had already begun, not by decree, but by dominance. What would Charles decide? And then, in a move that shocked even his closest advisors, Charles made the call that would change royal history forever. It came as a single sentence, brief, cold, and world-shaking. All forthcoming state duties will be overseen by the Prince and Princess of Wales. No mention of Camilla, no explanation, no hint of restoration, just a quiet statement buried in the official palace release. Was this the end of Camilla's role? But in that moment, the transition became complete. Without fanfare or proclamation, the monarchy had redrawn its own lines of power. Camilla's name, once a fixture in every royal program, had vanished as though it had never existed. The message was unmistakable. Her chapter had closed, and standing in her place, calm, composed, unshakable, was Catherine, the new face of royal strength. What did this mean for the monarchy's future? The announcement marked not just an administrative change, but a revolution in tone and direction. For William, it was the culmination of everything he had fought for, the reclamation of a moral monarchy, one that reflected empathy rather than entitlement. Yet behind his quiet triumph was a storm of emotion. The decision carried the ghost of his mother's legacy, the weight of unfinished stories and broken promises. How much did Diana influence this moment? As the words of the official statement echoed across television screens and headlines, he couldn't ignore the sense that Diana's vision, a monarchy rooted in humanity, had finally been realized. What had once been tragedy was now transformation. And though he would never say it aloud, he knew this was the moment his mother's shadow finally became light, guiding rather than haunting. Camilla, however, saw the same announcement as her complete undoing. How did Camilla react to this final blow? There were no dramatic exits, no public tears, just silence. She withdrew from engagements, citing health and fatigue, her name quietly fading from future appearances. Behind closed doors, she had become a ghost of her former self, watching as the empire she had fought to claim slipped through her fingers. Those closest to her said she no longer trusted the institution she once helped shape. Was this the end of Camilla's influence? For decades, she had survived scandal, criticism, and exile, but she could not survive irrelevance. Her allies, once loyal to her charm and cunning, now looked toward Kensington for direction and favor. The Queen Consort's reign had ended, not with scandal or rebellion, but with quiet inevitability. Catherine, meanwhile, bore her new role not with arrogance, but with gravity and purpose. What kind of leader would Catherine become? The weight of expectation was immense. The crown had made her not just a figure of admiration, but the living symbol of its rebirth. Every move she made carried deep meaning. Every silence became a statement. She didn't seek to dominate the throne. She simply embodied what it had forgotten: empathy, strength, and purpose. She accepted the responsibility not as conquest, but as duty. And in that acceptance, the monarchy found something it hadn't possessed in years: genuine trust from the people. How did the world respond? Across the world, leaders, diplomats, and citizens took notice. Global admiration poured in, not because of titles or bloodlines, but because of character. In a world fatigued by spectacle and empty promises, Catherine and William represented something rare and precious. Restraint, unity, and quiet conviction. Together, they stood as symbols of renewal, bridging the gap between history and modernity. Was the monarchy finally evolving? The monarchy's survival had never depended on tradition alone. It depended on its ability to evolve and adapt. And now, under their stewardship, it finally had that ability. The transformation was complete, not through rebellion or violence, but through resolve and steady determination. What had begun as a feud had ended as a succession. One unspoken, yet undeniable to everyone watching. Had power truly shifted? The crown's power no longer resided in bloodlines or ancient lineage, but in hearts, in the respect it could earn, rather than the authority it could demand. And as the palace lights dimmed that night, one truth echoed through every hall, corridor, and chamber. The future had arrived, and it wore a different face. A face of compassion, grace, and unwavering strength. Catherine had not just inherited a role, she had redefined it completely. What does this mean for the royal family's future? The monarchy stood at a crossroads, transformed by quiet revolution. William and Catherine had not destroyed tradition. They had breathed new life into it, making it relevant for a modern world hungry for authenticity and humanity. The old order, represented by Camilla and her allies, had faded into the background. Not defeated in battle, but simply overtaken by time and change. Where will the monarchy go from here? As the dust settled and the palace returned to its outward calm, one thing remained certain. The crown would never be the same again. The power struggle that had threatened to tear the monarchy apart had instead forged something stronger. A royal family led not by protocol and distance, but by purpose and connection. Catherine's ascension was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Will this new era bring lasting change? And so the question remains, echoing in the hearts of royal watchers around the world. Can this new monarchy, built on compassion and modernity, truly survive in a world that demands both tradition and progress? Only time will tell if William and Catherine's vision will stand the test of history, or if the old ways will eventually reclaim their throne. Now, I want to hear from you. After everything you've learned about this incredible power shift, who do you think should truly lead the monarchy into the future? Should it be the experienced traditional approach of the older generation, or the modern compassionate vision of William and Catherine? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on this historic transformation. And if you found this deep dive into royal politics as fascinating as I did, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell. We've got so many more incredible royal stories coming your way. Stories that reveal the hidden dynamics and untold truths behind palace walls. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Thanks so much for watching until the very end. Your support means everything. Until next time, stay curious about the secrets and stories that shape our world. The monarchy has been forever changed, and we've been here to witness history unfold together.